Imagine trying to build an empire with nothing but fire, water, and sheer grit. Long before dynamite and drills, ancient civilizations somehow pulled the planet's hidden treasures right out of solid rock. This is the story of how they did it. How they faced down darkness and danger, and came up with brilliant techniques to get the metals that would change the world forever. This isn't a story about high-tech machinery, but about human will, a story that laid the foundations for our world today. Before all our modern comforts, there was the Stone Age. For thousands of years, human progress was measured by what you could chip from a rock or carve from wood. Tools were useful, but they broke. Weapons worked, but they had their limits. Progress was slow. But deep inside the earth was a secret, a family of materials that promised a whole new era. They were just hidden, locked away inside boring-looking rocks. The challenge was huge. How could our ancestors, with just their hands, some basic tools, and the elements, possibly get to these treasures? They couldn't see underground, they didn't have chemical tests or blueprints. The problem they faced was one of the biggest in human history. How do you go from a world of stone to a world of metal? The answer wasn't a single invention, but a whole series of clever ideas, born from watching the world around them, desperation, and incredible ingenuity. And it all started with a little glint of light in a stream. Humanity's love affair with metal didn't start with some huge mining operation. It was much smaller. Gold was probably the first metal to catch our eye. It just showed up, pure and shiny, in rivers and streams. You can just picture an early human grabbing a drink and seeing a yellow flicker in the gravel. It's heavier than other stones, it doesn't break, and you can hammer it into shapes. That was placer mining in its simplest form. Just picking up nuggets of gold or copper that nature had already washed out of the mountains. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all started their hunt for gold this way, using pans to sift through river mud. The lighter sand would wash away, and the heavy gold would stay behind. Some stories even suggest that the myth of the Golden Fleece came from a real practice where sheepskins were staked down in rivers to trap tiny gold flakes in the wool. But you can't build a civilization on just what you find lying on the ground. The real prize was underground, in veins of ore buried deep inside the rock. The first real mines were pretty humble. Archaeologists have found evidence from the New Stone Age that early humans dug for things like flint and red ochre with simple tools. The oldest known mine, Lion Cave in Swaziland, is over 40,000 years old, which just shows how long we've been digging for valuable stuff. These first miners used whatever they had, sharpened sticks, animal bones, and stone hammers. They'd dig shallow pits, following veins of colorful minerals like green malachite or blue azurite, which they learned were signs of copper. They'd use heavy stone mauls to pound away at the ore, chipping off tiny fragments. It was brutal, slow work. A whole day of backbreaking labor might only get you a handful of ore. To really get to the Earth's riches and start a new age, they needed a way to break the mountain itself. They needed something more powerful than just muscle. They found it in fire. Making the jump from just scratching at the surface to real, organized mining took a revolution in thinking. Ancient miners, staring at impossible rock faces, came up with a method that was as simple as it was brilliant: fire setting. This technique was used from prehistoric times all the way up through the Middle Ages, and it became one of the most important tools in the ancient world. The process was simple, but it worked. Miners would pile a huge amount of wood against a rock face, either out in the open or deep in a tunnel, and set it on fire. The intense heat would bake the rock for hours. As the rock got super hot, the different minerals inside it would expand at different rates, creating tons of stress and tiny cracks. Then came the masterstroke. The miners would douse the scorching hot rock with cold water. The thermal shock was devastating. The rapid cooling made the rock crack, splinter, and turn brittle. A rock face that was impossible to break could now be smashed up pretty easily with hammers and picks. They'd repeat this cycle of heating and cooling over and over, letting them slowly push through solid rock. The historian Diodorus Siculus described this exact method being used in ancient Egyptian gold mines. Even the famous General Hannibal supposedly used fire setting to clear rock falls when he was crossing the Alps. Now, fire setting was a breakthrough, but it had big problems. In underground tunnels, the smoke and poisonous fumes from the fire were deadly without good ventilation. Miners were always at risk of suffocating from carbon monoxide. The process also used up a massive amount of wood, which led to major deforestation around big mining areas. But fire was only part of the solution. As mining got bigger, especially under the Roman Empire, they brought in an even more powerful force: water. The Romans perfected a technique called hydraulic mining, or hushing. This was engineering on a massive scale. First, they'd build complex systems of aqueducts, sometimes for miles, to bring water to the mining site. They'd collect this water in huge reservoirs built on high ground above the mine. When the reservoirs were full, they'd open the gates and unleash a massive flood down the hillside. This wall of water would strip away tons of soil and loose rock in just a few hours, a job that would have taken an army of workers weeks to do by hand. Pliny the Elder, a Roman official who saw this happen, called it ruina montium, the wrecking of the mountains. At places like Las Medullas in Spain, the biggest open-pit gold mine in the Roman Empire, this technique was used to literally tear mountains apart. The landscape they left behind, a stunning scene of sharp red peaks, is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, a monument to the incredible power the Romans controlled. Once the ore veins were exposed, they'd use a mix of fire setting and hushing to break up the hard rock and wash away the junk. This let them get to gold on a scale no one had ever imagined, fueling the giant Roman economy and its armies. Of course, all of this still came down to human muscle. The ancient miners' tools were simple: iron picks and hammers to chip away at the weakened rock. One especially useful tool was the Roman delabra fossoria, a pick on one end and a mattock on the other. All the ore and debris had to be carried out of the mines in woven baskets, a job often given to the smallest workers. Life for these miners was brutal and short. The work was done by slaves, criminals, and prisoners of war. The Roman punishment, damnatio ad metalli, condemnation to the mines, was basically a death sentence. They faced daily dangers from rockfalls, flooding, and poisonous air. Tunnels were cramped and dark, filled with toxic gas and dust. Kids were often used to crawl into the tightest spots to grab ore. In deeper mines, water had to be removed by hand, or with clever devices like the Archimedes screw or huge, human-powered water wheels. It was a world of darkness and endless labor. But this human sacrifice is what brought the riches of the earth to the surface. Getting ore out of the ground was only half the battle. The chunks of rock they brought out of the mine were mostly worthless. The precious metal was still locked inside. The next part of the process needed a different kind of genius, a sort of practical alchemy that could turn dusty rock into pure, shiny metal. First, they had to separate the ore from the waste rock. This meant crushing. Ore was smashed by hand with heavy hammers. In bigger operations, they started developing early water-powered mills to help crush the rock, an idea that would become much more common in the Middle Ages. Once it was crushed, the ore was often washed. Water running through sluices would carry away the lighter rock dust, leaving the heavier, metal-filled particles behind. With the ore concentrated, the real magic could begin: smelting. This is where you use heat and a chemical agent to pull the metal out of the ore. Early metal workers would build simple furnaces, maybe just a pit or a clay structure, and fill it with crushed ore and charcoal. When the charcoal burned, it did two things. It got incredibly hot, and it produced carbon monoxide. That gas was the key. It chemically ripped the oxygen away from the ore, leaving behind molten metal. The earliest evidence for copper smelting is from the 5th millennium BCE. At first, these furnaces probably just used the wind to get hot enough. But soon people invented bellows to pump air into the fire, cranking up the heat to melt metal. These innovations didn't just give us copper, they started a whole new era. Around 3000 BCE, metal workers discovered that adding a little bit of tin to copper created a much stronger alloy: bronze. That discovery was so huge it kicked off the Bronze Age, a time of strong tools, powerful weapons, and new, complex societies. Getting pure gold and silver was even trickier. One of the most important methods was cupellation, a process known since the early Bronze Age. Silver is often found mixed with lead. To separate them, the ore was heated in a cupel, a porous dish made of ceramic or bone ash. As hot air was blown over it, the lead would turn into a substance called litharge and either get absorbed into the dish or blown away, leaving behind a bead of pure, shining silver. For gold, another clever, if pretty terrifying, method was amalgamation. Crushed gold ore was mixed with mercury, Gold dissolves into mercury, forming a mixture called an amalgam. This was then heated. The mercury would turn into a highly toxic vapor, leaving the pure gold behind. While it became more widespread later on, it was a known technique for getting every last speck of gold. And what if gold and silver were mixed together, like in the natural alloy electrum? The ancients had a fix for that too, called cementation. They would layer sheets of the alloy with salt and brick dust in a sealed pot and heat it for days. The salt would react with the silver, which was then absorbed by the brick dust, leaving behind almost pure gold. These processes show an incredible, practical understanding of chemistry, thousands of years before the science was officially a thing. These people weren't just miners, they were the world's first metallurgists and chemical engineers. Mastering mining and metallurgy wasn't just a tech upgrade. It completely reshaped human society. Having access to metals, first copper, then bronze, then iron, set off a chain reaction that led to the first real empires. Farming was transformed. Metal sickles and hoes were way more durable and efficient than stone ones, which meant farmers could grow more food. That food surplus was the foundation of civilization. It meant not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. People were free to become soldiers, craftsmen, priests, and rulers. The effect on warfare was even more dramatic. A bronze sword beats a stone club every time. An army with metal weapons and armor had a massive advantage. Control over metal resources, copper and tin for bronze, iron ore for iron, became the #1 goal for kingdoms. The wealth from the mines paid for armies and expansion. The silver from the mines of Laurion, for instance, let Athens build the navy that defeated the Persians and kicked off its golden age. The tons of gold from mines like Las Medullas filled the Roman Empire's treasury, paying its soldiers and building its incredible cities. Metal became the engine of trade. For the first time, people had something durable, portable, and valuable to use as currency: coins. The invention of coinage standardized trade and created huge economic networks that connected continents. The hunt for metals drove exploration and created long-distance trade routes, spreading not just goods, but ideas and knowledge. All this new wealth also led to an explosion in art and culture. Artisans created intricate jewelry, stunning statues, and decorations for temples and palaces that were powerful symbols of status. Society itself was remade. A new class of metalworkers, merchants, and military leaders rose to the top. Societies became more layered, with kings and emperors controlling the resources and all the power that came with them. But this progress had a huge cost. The endless need for wood for fires and smelting led to massive deforestation. Mining operations scarred the landscape and polluted rivers. Smelting released clouds of toxic gases. In fact, scientists have found evidence of lead pollution from Roman smelting trapped in Greenland's ice sheets today. And, as we've seen, this whole system was built on the backs of disposable workers, whose suffering was just seen as the price to pay for the metals that built empires. It's a dark paradox that the materials that stood for wealth and beauty were pulled from the earth through some of the most miserable labor in human history. From a shiny pebble in a river to the giant operations that tore down mountains, the story of ancient mining is the story of our relentless drive to figure things out. Faced with the impossible task of breaking the earth, our ancestors didn't just dig. They experimented and harnessed the forces of nature itself. They learned to crack stone with fire and water, move mountains with engineered floods, and turn rock into riches with a kind of primitive alchemy. These techniques weren't just clever tricks, they were the key that unlocked a new age. Metal gave us better plows and stronger swords, the coins that fueled global trade, and the materials for timeless art. The methods were brutal, the human cost was staggering, and the environmental damage was real, but it's impossible to imagine our world without them. Every steel skyscraper, every copper wire, every gold circuit in your phone owes a tiny debt to these ancient pioneers. They worked in darkness so their civilizations could thrive in the light. They armed themselves with little more than fire, water, and determination. And with them, they forged the world we live in today. The next time you see a piece of metal, just remember the incredible journey it started not in a factory, but in the heart of a mountain, at the hands of people who dared to conquer solid rock. If you found this journey into the ancient world fascinating, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about the incredible history of technology. And let me know in the comments what ancient tech you'd like to see me cover next. Thanks for watching.